Welcome back to our Agone Institute Models of Sports Ministry in the 21st Century course. I'm Dr. Greg Linville, and along with my colleague Tim Conrad and our two ministries, CSRM and Uncharted Waters, UW, we present these teaching lessons. This is our instructional video, and it is on the ancient first century athletics. And again, every one of these courses we have is about 20% review or preview, and so we're going to review what we teach in our history course, our ancient history course. And this is important for us to establish a lot of what we do today. The first segment we're going to look at today are going to be what is called the Crown Games. Crown meaning the crown that was placed upon the victor's head who won these games. And there were 4 of these games in the first century AD when the Apostle Paul and the New Testament church was intersecting with the culture, the secular culture of their day. You will be given a set of PowerPoint notes, and so you would want to look for those PowerPoint notes of 1B. And on the first page you will see that it talks about in antiquity that there were 4 sanctuaries that were associated with athletic games. So during Paul's lifetime, in which he wrote most of his, all of his letters, and the book of Acts was written, you will see that there were these 4 cities that were the host of the 4 premier game sites in all of ancient Greece and Roman Empire. These were at Olympia, where we get the modern-day Olympic movement from, Delphi, up in more of the Macedonian area of Greece, and then 2 near Corinth, Nemea and also Isthmia. And so on the map you have on your PowerPoint, you'll see where those were located. On the second PowerPoint slide, you will see that a picture of each of these 4 games. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll see Delphi, and then lower left, you will see Olympia, and then you'll see Isthmia, Nemea. You'll see these were near the city of Corinth. The Olympics, of course, were the most prestigious of all the games, if you won them. But they were the least attended due to the harsh conditions and distance from the population centers. The Pythian Games, this was at Delphi, were held in opposite years every 4 years. So say on year 2 was the Pythian Games, and year 4 is the Olympic Games, and then year 6 would be the Pythian Games and on. Then Nemea, the Nemean and Isthmian Games were held every 2 years, like in years 1 and 3. So they went hand in hand. Now if you go to the third slide, you'll see pictures again of Olympia and Delphi. And you can see at Delphi that as you come up the mountain, you will see, first of all, on the lowest part of the slide, this would be where the temple, where the oracle of Delphi, think oracle meaning prophet, that this is where this temple was. And then the next little excavated site up the mountain is where the theater was. And in the far right-hand corner, upper right-hand corner, you'll see where the stadium was there. Now, Olympia could have been a good possibility from Paul's writings in Hebrews, and yes, I believe he wrote Hebrews, but we don't really know. This is conjecture. Delphi too is possible, but more likely that Paul never went to Delphi. I can find otherwise nothing that would indicate to me in all of my research, and I've been on sites, and I've been on these historical sites, and I've done research for many, many decades now. I think that Paul might have visited Delphi because of the oracle of Delphi and how important and famous that was. But otherwise, I can find no compelling reason that he ever would have gone there And certainly there's no reference in any way that he was part of the Pythian Games. He certainly would have known about it. The next slide you have is a picture of Olympia. You will see that the temple of Zeus is the big structure there. And you'll see that the pathway that leads right out in front of it takes the people down to where the stadium was. And you will see that the gymnasium and the palestra, all of these places were athletic. Gymnasium is where some of the events would take place. The palestra is where the boxing, the wrestling, the pancratium, and of course the stadium is where they would do a lot of their foot races. On the next slide you see great huge stones that have fallen over. These were the pillars that held up the temple to Zeus. And of course this temple to Zeus was one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world, and it was well known throughout. And as you turn to the next slide, you'll get a perspective of the size and grandeur of this temple. You can see that these stones were nigh to 2.5, 3 feet in height, and some 5 to 6 feet in width, and literally weighed tons each. And you can see in the background of this picture, you'll see the sacred groves of the olive trees there. Now, in one of our spiritual formation videos during this course, we will talk more about this particular site, and you will get a perspective of it. But here you see some of the pictures of it. And the reason that these olive branches are so important is because this is what the crown was woven out of. This vegetation that was placed upon the heads of the winners of these Olympic Games came from this sacred grove of olive trees where the temple of Zeus was built. I hope that you're picking up how closely related that the religion and the sport was to the ancient Greek. They went hand in hand, much like it is today in our 21st century. Now, the next slide you have, I believe it's your 8th one, is the picture of the Stadion. This was where the race was held, and this one is 192 meters. This, by the way, was the only, this site was the only one that held any of the most recent Olympic events in 2004 when Athens and Greece hosted the modern-day Olympics. This was not used for running, however. This was used for the shot put, because none of the original venues could have held the modern day, because the athletes have thrown farther, run faster, etc., etc. The crowds were far larger. So while this originally was the race site, this was the site on the modern Olympics for the shot put. I want to call your attention to a couple of things in this slide. About a quarter of the way, or maybe not quite of the way up the stadium, you'll see a line of stones. Those were the starting blocks for the runners. This is where the runners would start. And then on the far end, there would be one post that was out of the ground, the turning post. And all of these runners would run there and get around the post to come back. Now, down was a stadium, up and back was a 2 stadium, and then 3 and 4 you can add and know how far they were running. So think about the 100-yard dash or the 200 or the 400. They had similar kinds of events. But you can imagine the crashes that would hit each other as the runners would hit each other at the far end. And then about 2/3 of the way down on the right-hand side on that picture, you'll see kind of a little outcropping of stones. Those were the only seats there. You see, this is a place where people did not attend because, again, of the harsh conditions. And those seats there were reserved for the Hellenodikai, the Greek Hellenodikai judges or referees or umpires, the Greek judges and all of their entourage. And so you see that this was for athletes and not for spectators. In fact, we have a historical document that indicates that a slave owner was so angry with one of his slaves that his punishment was that he had to go and watch the Olympic Games. No accommodations, hot, buggy, miserable. On your next slide, you see a long path on the left-hand side of your picture as the people were walking from the Temple of Zeus into the stadium. And you see this archway that would then lead them into the stadium. And on that picture, on the lower right-hand corner, you see a blow-up of a pedestal, if you will. And on the left-hand picture, you see that how they're all in a line, all these different pedestals. This is the last thing that the Olympic athletes would see before they walked into the stadium. This was called their walk of shame because on these pedestals would be placed the bust, the heads and the shoulders of the athletes. And the athletes had to pay for these out of their own pocket. And underneath of them, their name would be inscribed. And you can see just barely some of the inscription there. They're still visible today, thousands of years later. Why is it called the Walk of Shame? Because these were the people, these were the men, there was never women in the original Olympics. These were the men who cheated. And when they found out that they were cheats, they were forced to pay for their own bust so everybody could see who it was, and then their name was inscribed underneath of it. They took cheating very seriously. And it happened back then as it did today. Your last slide that you'll see is that this is a 2-lane gymnasium. And this would have been a portico that would have been covering, and that was their air conditioning because it protected you from the sun, and open the sides and ends, the wind would blow through. And so the athletes would train here and they would race here. And each of these pillars you see in this would go up to hold a roof. So this is the ancient form of conditioning. Well, this gives you a little bit of an overview of the Olympic Games and of the Crown Games that sets us up for our next video as we begin to talk about some other games in the ancient era that can help you as you begin to think through your models of sports ministry in the 21st century. I'm Dr. Greg Linville. This completes our session 1B.